Chapter 26:31. Sha Yutang seemed to have caught something. He pointed to the front and said, "Look, she really wants to trap my sister. The maidservant took my sister in and left by herself. Damn it, I'm going to see what the hell she wants to do." He strode forward angrily. Seeing this, Fengjiu glanced in the direction of the maidservant's departure and followed Sha Yutang. When they came to the yard, they were a little surprised, because the yard seemed to be a deserted place. There were only 2 big trees on the left and right. Moreover, there were 2 cheer-restraining arrays around the 2 big trees, one of which was used to hide the spiritual aura in the yard. "Little Sher! Little Sher!" Sha Yutang shouted, but his sister didn't answer. Strange, why didn't she answer me? He stepped forward and pushed open the door of the only wing room in the yard. After entering, he found that the room was empty and there was nothing in it. But in the yard, there were no other rooms or backyards except for this room. Why is there no one? Little Sher! Little Sher! He was a little flustered and shouted anxiously, but there was no response. He couldn't help but turn back and walk quickly to Fengjiu. What should I do? Little Sher is missing. Fengjiu walked slowly and looked at the empty room. Her eyes fell on the center of the room. She walked slowly at first, then took a few steps back, as if she was studying something. After a while, she looked at the surrounding walls carefully. There should be a secret passage in here. Look for it. There may be a mechanism on the wall. She said slowly and looked around the wall. Mechanism. His face turned pale, and then he gritted his teeth. How dare that maidservant hurt my sister? Someone must have ordered her to do this. Otherwise, how dare a maidservant do such a thing? Fengjiu said lightly, tapping on the wall with her hand. She looked around the wall of the room but didn't find it. Seeing Sha Yutang walking around anxiously, she returned to the door and closed her eyes to think carefully. Judging from the time the maidservant took Xia Shirsi into the room and left, if there was a mechanism, it should be by the door, right? Thinking of this, she opened her eyes and looked around the door carefully. When she pressed a brick in her hand and found that it could move, she pressed it hard. The spiritual power in the room gushed out, and a vortex appeared under Sha Yutang's feet in the middle of the room. The vortex instantly sank and sucked Sha Yutang in. Ah! Before he could react, he cried out in alarm and fell into the whirlpool, disappearing without a trace. When Fengjiu saw this, he frowned and immediately jumped in as well. Outside a courtyard of the Ruan Manor, the 3rd Miss of the Ruan family, the young girl who had fought with the beautiful woman over the cloth, saw the return of the servant girl. Her eyes lit up with joy, and after looking left and right, she quickly walked forward. What do you think? Did you lure Xia Shirsi in? She asked excitedly. At this moment, the maidservant's face was somewhat pale. Her expression also carried a bit of panic and apprehension. She looked at the 3rd young miss of the Ruan family and said in a small voice, "It has already fallen in." No one saw it, right? 3rd Miss Ruan asked. No, there's nothing in the surroundings. The maidservant replied. Chapter 26:32. Yes, young Mississippi, the maidservant replied and quickly retreated after receiving the brocade pouch. 3rd young Miss Ruan happily chuckled and thought to herself, once you enter that place, I'll see how you die. At this time, the beautiful woman who was chatting with Mistress Ruan and the others saw that her daughter had gone out for so long and couldn't help but turn around to look. Look at you, your daughter has only gone out for a while and you're already worried. What? Are you worried that something will happen to her here? Mistress Ruan joked as her gaze fell on the beautiful woman's gentle face. It had been so many years, but she still looked the same. Seeing the happy smile in her eyes when she talked about her children and her husband, she couldn't help but feel a little jealous. However, she suppressed it very well, and her face was still full of smiles, full of deep sisterly love. This child of mine always makes me worry at home. If I don't see her in a while, I'm afraid that she'll cause trouble again. The beautiful woman said softly. It's fine. If she doesn't come back in a while, I'll send someone to look for her. Mistress Ruan said as she smiled and picked a grape to eat. The beautiful woman smiled and nodded. After all, she was at the Ruan residence and it was Mistress Ruan who had invited her as a guest. If something happened to the guest, it would be hard for the host to explain. Thinking of this, she relaxed and didn't think about it anymore. At this time, after Xia fell from the whirlpool, she inexplicably fell into a forest. What she didn't expect was that there was a crouching beast in the place she fell. Her entire body smashed into the beast and was pushed several meters away by the beast that suddenly stood up. Hiss! She cried out in pain and scrambled to her feet. She saw the ferocious beast walking towards her while letting out a low howl. Don't come over. Don't come over. She was so scared that her face turned white. She had been well protected since young and had never encountered such a large beast. She also didn't know how she suddenly appeared in this forest. Don't come over, don't come over. If you continue, I won't be polite anymore. She was so frightened that she took out a long sword from her spatial ring and held it in her hand. However, her body was trembling. The ferocious beast snorted in disdain. It glanced at her contemptuously before it leaped and pounced on her. It would be strange if it didn't want to eat such delicious food. Ah! Xia was so frightened that she threw away the sword in her hand and ran away. She screamed in panic, "Help! Save me! Mother! Mother! Father, brother, save me! Come and save me!" However, after running for about 500 meters, perhaps her cry for help had attracted the other beasts in the forest. She heard a series of howls and roars in the forest, scaring Xia so much that her face turned as white as paper. The path in front of her was blocked by another ferocious beast. She stopped in a panic and turned around to look at the ferocious beast that was chasing after her. Then, she looked at the ferocious beast in front of her that was baring its sharp teeth and drooling. She could not help but cry. "Don't eat me, I don't taste good," sob. Chapter 26:33. Roar! Ow! Below, the two beasts fought for the fresh and tender food. The two beasts pounced on each other and tore at each other. Xia, who was in the tree, was so scared that she hugged the branch tightly. She looked at the two ferocious beasts tearing each other apart. The splashing of blood, the tearing of flesh, and the sharp fangs frightened her so much that her teeth chattered. Her body trembled, and her legs became weak, unable to take a step forward. "No, if I stay here any longer, when one of the two beasts dies, I'll die too," she muttered, her pale face filled with fear and helplessness. "I have to live. I have to go home." She took a deep breath and calmed herself down. However, no matter how calm she was, her heart was still trembling. The fear from the bottom of her heart, the helplessness of having no one to rely on in a dangerous situation, and no one to protect her, made her panic. But she also knew that she had to leave at this time, otherwise, the next target of the beasts below would be her. So, she tried to suppress the fear in her heart and used her spiritual power to warm her hands and feet, which were cold because of extreme fear. When she felt the warmth in her dantian, her hands and feet gradually recovered their feeling and strength. She remembered the treasure in her space. Yes, the flying celestial device given by Dad. Her eyes lit up, and she quickly found her flying celestial device from the space. It was a flying leaf. When she threw the flying leaf and jumped on it, she could not help but exhale a sigh of relief. She sat on the flying leaf and left the place. However, after flying for a distance, she suddenly heard a cry from above her head. Instinctively, she looked up and saw a huge bird with a sharp beak flapping its wings and attacking her. "Ah!" She cried out in alarm, and her entire body fell from the sky along with her flying magic tool. When Fengjiu and Sha Yutang fell from the vortex, they just heard the exclamation. Sha Yutang lost his balance and fell to the ground. Fengjiu, who fell next, used his spiritual power to land lightly and looked in the direction of the exclamation. "Get up quickly. It's your sister's voice," Fengjiu said and rushed in that direction. Sha Yutang, who hadn't realized how he fell here, quickly got up and chased after him. After running for more than 10 meters, he saw something shining with cold light. He looked at it carefully and found it was his sister's sword. He quickly ran over and picked up the sword. His heart tightened, and he hurried to catch up with Fengjiu. In front of him, Fengjiu flashed through the weeds. His speed was so fast that Sha Yutang could not catch up with him. When she saw a beast that had been bitten to death about 500 meters away, her eyes narrowed, and she hurried forward. Sha Yutang, who was chasing after her, also saw the beast and whose flesh was torn by sharp teeth. His face, he turned pale and cried and exclaimed and ran. "No, don't come over." Xie Shirsi fell to the ground and fell from the aircraft. She sprained her ankle and could not stand up. When she saw the beast with blood in its mouth approaching step by step, with bloodthirsty and ferocious light in its eyes, she cried and felt desperate. "Mother! Father! Where are you? Come and save me, Wu! I don't want to die." Chapter 26:34. Thinking that she was going to die, she held her head tightly with both hands and closed her eyes. However, after waiting for a while, she only heard a fierce airflow passing through the air, followed by a loud bang in front of her. She was stunned for a while and carefully opened her eyes. She only saw that about 20 meters away from her, Fengjiu, dressed in green, was coming up step by step with a sword in his hand. Seeing him, she shouted in surprise, "Fengjiu, Fengjiu! I'm here, I'm here!" She endured the pain in her foot and stood up. She limped over to him and threw herself into his arms, hugging him tightly with both hands. "Wu! I thought I was going to die. I thought I would be eaten. Wu! It's so scary. Those beasts are so scary." After seeing Feng Nine, her heart, which had been in a state of panic and fear, finally calmed down. Seeing a familiar person save her in the midst of despair and helplessness, she just wanted to throw herself into his arms and cry out loud, venting the fear in her heart. "It's all right. Don't worry," Feng Jiu said softly. She reached out and patted her head. She was glad that she didn't come late. Otherwise, she couldn't imagine what kind of scene she would see. "Sister." Sha Yutang also ran over. Seeing the dead beast, he couldn't help exhaling a sigh of relief and walked quickly to them. "Sister, how are you? Are you hurt?" he asked worriedly. "Brother. Wu, brother, I'm so scared. I'm so scared to die here. I'm so scared that I can't see you and mother." She turned to him, threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. Feeling that his sister's body was still trembling, Sha Yutang's heart ached. He comforted her clumsily, "It's all right. Don't be afraid. I'm here. I'll protect you." After a long while, Xie Shirsi, who finally calmed down, wiped her eyes and looked at them with red eyes. "How did you come here? Where is this? We were clearly in the Ruan Manor. How did we fall into this forest?" "We were going to look for you and mother," but we saw a maidservant take you to the back courtyard, so we followed. When we saw the maidservant take you into the courtyard and leave, we knew that things were bad. We went into the courtyard to look for you, but we couldn't find you. Fortunately, Fengjiu was there. He found an opportunity on the wall, but a whirlpool appeared, and we fell down. Sha Yutang said, looking at Fengjiu with gratitude. If it wasn't for him, his sister would probably have been eaten by that ferocious beast. Thinking of the ferocious beast, he couldn't help but look at the ferocious beast lying motionless on the ground. Kill with a single sword strike. His heart trembled slightly, and he quickly walked forward to take a look. Sure enough, it was a one-hit kill. However, this ferocious beast was at the peak of the holy beast level. Fengjiu was actually able to kill it with a single strike. He couldn't help but look at Fengjiu, who was talking to his sister, and thought to himself, how strong is Fengjiu? How does he know so many things? What are you doing? Dig out the beast crystal. Fengjiu saw him standing there in a daze, so he said. Ah. Oh. Sha Yutang calmed down, took out a dagger and dug out the beast crystal. Then he saw Fengjiu, who had come to his side, stretched out his hand. What? He asked in a daze. Chapter 26:35. If you want, you can kill it yourself. Anyway, there should be a lot of fierce beasts here. She said leisurely and glanced around. She didn't expect that the Ruan's mansion was so special. How can there be such a place in the Ruan's mansion? Sha Yutang asked with a frown. You're asking me. Who should I ask? Anyway, this is definitely not the Ruan's mansion. How can we get out? Xie Shirsi asked. Looking around at the forest, she couldn't help but worry. It seems that there is no way here. Fengjiu spread out his hands and said, I came in so suddenly that I don't know how to get out. She paused for a moment and said, You guys wait for me. I'll go dig out the crystal beast in front of us. After saying that, she walked back. Little Shi, this is your flying magic weapon and the sword you dropped in front of us. Take them. Sha Yutang picked up the flying magic weapon and returned it to her together with the sword he found in front of them. Thank you, brother. She took the things and stepped on her sprained foot. She couldn't help but gasp and fall down. Sha Yutang hurriedly supported her and asked worriedly, What's wrong? What's wrong with your foot? I sprained it when I fell down just now. It hurts a little, she said, biting her lower lip. Sit down, sit down. He was about to sit down when he heard Fengjiu's voice coming back. The smell of blood has already spread and will definitely attract other ferocious beasts. We can't sit here any longer. Let's leave first. As she spoke, she slowly walked back and glanced at Xie Shirsi's feet. Hearing this, Sha Yutang said to his sister, Come on, little Shi, I'll carry you. Okay. Xie Shirsi nodded and lay on her brother's back. Where are we going? Sha Yutang looked at Fengjiu and asked. This way. Fengjiu pointed to a direction on the left and walked in that direction. Sha Yutang followed with his sister on his back. After they had walked quite a distance, Fengjiu stopped and said, Let's rest here first. Hearing this, Sha Yutang couldn't help sighing. Then he put his sister down. After helping her sit down, he wiped his sweat. When he was about to take out the medicine for bruises from the space ring, he saw that Fengjiu had stepped forward and squatted down beside his sister. Take off your boots and pull up your skirt, Fengjiu said. Oh. Xie Shirsi responded and followed Fengjiu's instructions. She pulled her skirt up a little, revealing her red and swollen ankle. Why is it so swollen? Sha Yutang also squatted down. Seeing Fengjiu touch his sister's foot, he couldn't help but push his hand away with a dark face. What are you doing? Fengjiu looked up and glanced at him in confusion. What do you mean? You touched my sister's foot. How can you touch a girl's foot as a man? He said angrily and took out the medicine himself. I have medicine here. I'll help her apply some. Seeing this, Fengjiu was stunned for a moment and then laughed. You're quite protective of your sister. Of course, I'm her brother. Who should I protect if not her? Sha Yutong raised his chin and helped his sister apply the medicine casually. Then he said, well, that's it. Chapter 2636. Sha Yutong was stunned and asked, what else? Fengjiu shook his head and said, apply the medicine thickly and tie it with a belt. Let the medicine be applied to the red and swollen area. Hearing this, Sha Yutong thought it was reasonable, so he did as he said. After applying some medicine, he tore 2 cloth belts from his old space clothes and wrapped his feet. Little Shi, come on, put on your boots. He didn't tie too many bandages, and the boots weren't very tight, so he could still put the ointment on his feet. However, just as he helped his sister put on the boots, he heard the roars of ferocious beasts coming from all around. Ow! Roar! Hearing the roars from the forest, Sha Yutong became nervous. After helping his sister up, he carried her on his back and walked quickly to Fengjiu. It sounds like fierce beasts. Why do I hear so many of them? What the hell is this place? He looked around vigilantly, only to see the leaves rustling as they swayed, but he didn't know how far the fierce beasts were from them. Sha Yutong, who had never seen such a situation, was slightly shocked and had cold sweat on his forehead, but he still pretended to be calm. But when he saw Fengjiu's casual look, he screamed like a cat with hair standing on end. There are fierce beasts. Didn't you hear the roars? Those fierce beasts may be coming to us. Aren't you nervous and afraid? He glared and shouted angrily. He was scared half to death, and his heart was in his throat. But who knew that Fengjiu was so relaxed? Did he know where he was? Did he know that they were in danger now? If they didn't pay attention, the 3 of them were likely to die here, and even their bones would be gone. Fengjiu looked at him in surprise and said, don't be nervous. They haven't appeared yet, have they? Besides, there must be more than a few fierce beasts here. If these fierce beasts scare you like this, what will happen later? Hearing this, Sha Yutong, who had been pretending to be calm, couldn't help but panic. What should I do? What should I do? I'm just at the peak of Zhuji realm, not even a Jindan realm cultivator. I haven't encountered so many fierce beasts before. I can't beat them. Brother, Fengjiu is here. Don't be afraid. Xia Shirsi, who was lying on his back, blinked and comforted him softly. She looked at Fengjiu and smiled sweetly. You will protect us, right? Fengjiu raised his eyebrows, looked at her, and smiled. Don't worry. The fierce beasts can't eat you. Sha Yutong's look around. There are many fierce beasts here, there are many fierce beasts here. You don't have a powerful contract beast. You don't have a powerful contracted beast. You don't have a powerful contracted beast. Sha Yutong's panic gradually calmed down. He glanced at Fengjiu and muttered, it's not a pet beast. How can it be so easy to contract with one? But it's difficult for us to contract a powerful contracted beast with our strength, Xia Shirsi said, a little distressed. They didn't want a contracted beast with ordinary fighting power, but they couldn't contract one with strong fighting power. Chapter 2637. She walked slowly in front, and the 2 people behind her did not notice the ancient aura that was emitting from her body. However, the ferocious beasts that were hiding in the bushes and preparing to pounce on the 3 of them sensed it. It was precisely because they perceived the dangerous aura that they didn't dare to go forward, but just stared in the dark and followed quietly. Among them, the holy beasts with higher spiritual intelligence stared at the three people for a while, and then their sharp and cautious eyes fell on the cyan figure in front of them. It was certain that the dangerous aura that permeated the air came from this human. That was the pressure of an ancient mythological beast. That kind of pressure made even a holy beast like it not dare to take half a step forward. After walking for a while, they didn't see any ferocious beasts, only the occasional sound of ferocious beasts in the forest. The CS siblings couldn't help but wonder, we clearly heard the sound of ferocious beasts. Why didn't they appear? Brother, I saw it just now. There was a ferocious beast following us, but it ran away halfway. Sia Shirsi whispered. She also felt that it was strange. Isn't it good that they didn't appear? Or do you have the ability to fight with ferocious beasts? Fingzhou didn't look back, still walking slowly, looking leisurely as if he was strolling in his own back garden. With her strength, she was not afraid of the ferocious beasts here. What's more, what kind of scene hadn't she experienced? Why would she be afraid of such a few ferocious beasts? No, I'm just thinking, if my mother can't find us, will she find us? Could she have known that we fell here? How are we going to get out? Sha Yutang said. He was inexplicably worried about these unknown things. Hearing this, Fengzhou glanced back at him and said, Don't worry about what you said. There is only one thing to think about here, that is, how to survive. The Xia siblings didn't speak anymore, but followed Fengzhou's footsteps step by step. In the Ruan family, the beautiful woman who hadn't seen her daughter for a long time finally couldn't sit still. She asked the mistress of the Ruan family to send someone to look for her. However, the result was that Xia Shirsi couldn't be found in the house. What she didn't expect was that not only her daughter was missing, but even her son and Fengzhou were missing. How can they disappear? The beautiful woman's eyes were full of worry, and she looked at the mistress of the Ruan family who was surprised. When the mistress of the Ruan family saw this, she said, Don't worry, I'll send someone to ask. Then, she got up and said to the beautiful woman, Come with me. The two of them left first and came to the side hall of the small courtyard. The Ruan family's matriarch called for her third daughter and asked, You've been accompanying the young ladies of the various manors in the courtyard. Do you know where the young lady of the Xia family went? Third Miss Ruan's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes flashed as she lowered her eyes and said, No, I haven't seen him. However, whether it was the mistress of the Ruan family or the beautiful woman, they were all shrewd people. Seeing her evasive gaze and a guilty look in her eyes, how could they not know that this matter was definitely related to her? Chapter 26:38. She was holding back her anger. She didn't expect her daughter, whom she had repeatedly warned, to cause trouble for her. She was usually a smart child. How could she be so muddle-headed in this matter? I really don't know. Maybe they went home. Third Miss Ruan braced herself and said. At this moment, she would be a fool if she admitted it. Anyway, once they entered that place, not even their bones would be left. If she admitted it now, the situation would be terrible. Hearing her daughter's words, the Ruan family's matriarch looked at the cold-faced beautiful woman and said, Could they have gone home? Why don't we send someone back to take a look? I'm still here. They can't go back. Something must have happened. The beautiful woman, who usually gave people a weak feeling, showed a strong aura at this moment. She stared at Third Miss Ruan and said, Third Miss Ruan, why does my intuition tell me that their disappearance has a lot to do with you? Hearing this, Third Miss Ruan instinctively looked up. A trace of panic flashed across her face. When the Ruan family's matriarch heard this, her heart became uneasy. She looked at the beautiful woman and said, Don't worry. I'll call the secret guard to ask. As soon as she finished speaking, she was about to call the secret guard out. Who knew that the beautiful woman's cold voice would be heard? Yurong, you and I have known each other for many years. You should know who I am. Today, if my son and daughter are safe and sound, then it's fine. But if anything happens to them, I won't let it go. As soon as the beautiful woman's voice fell, her gaze fell on third Miss Ruan. Her gaze met hers. It was as if there was something in that moment that made third Miss Ruan, who had only raised her head to take a look, unable to move her eyes away. Just as she was a little shocked, a little stunned, and a little flustered, she heard a voice that was as gentle as water. That voice was as gentle as a mother's hand, gently caressing her ears, causing her to relax and become intoxicated by this gentle voice. Tell me, where did you take Xieshursi? The beautiful woman's gentle voice slowly inquired. She looked at the third miss of the Ruan family. When their eyes met, it was as if something was forming. Third Miss Ruan's gaze gradually blurred. Hearing that voice, she followed it and said, Xieshursi is so annoying. I don't like her, so I let the servant girl trick her into the earth spiritual array. Once she enters there, she's dead for sure. Clang! Madame Ruan was shocked when she heard her words. Her hand trembled and the teacup she was about to drink fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. The tea splashed all over the floor, splashing her skirt and tea leaves. However, she didn't seem to notice and only looked at her daughter in disbelief. Because the teacup fell to the ground and because of the sudden crash, the Ruan family's third young miss, who had been muttering in a daze, suddenly came back to her senses. She looked at her mother and the beautiful woman in front of her as if she had just woken up. However, what followed after her was a heavy slap from the beautiful woman. Paw! The beautiful woman stood up with a cold expression. At the same time, she threw out that slap. That slap made her palm burn. It was easy to imagine how much strength she used to slap him. Chapter 2639. Why should I hit you? The beautiful woman's face was as cold as frost as she stared at her. If anything happens to my daughter, it won't be something that can be resolved with a slap. She turned to look at the Ruan family's head mother, Fang Yurong, whose expression had changed slightly, and asked, Where is the Earth spiritual formation? What kind of place is that? Perhaps because he was frightened by the stern expression on the beautiful woman's face, Ruan San's eyes were red, but he didn't dare to speak. He only hid by his mother's side. When he heard her say the three words, Earth Spirit Formation, his little face paled. How did she know about the Earth spiritual formation? The Ruan family's head mother opened her mouth and said, The Earth spiritual formation is a transportation formation that leads to the 10,000 poison forest training ground. There, she couldn't continue. She couldn't imagine what would happen if she was told that there were fierce beasts everywhere. Even the Ruan family's people who went there to train would only be sent in after repeated challenges. Now, a young girl had entered that place. Her fate could be imagined that I'll immediately go tell the family head and have him send some people in to take a look. The Ruan family's head mother said. She didn't bother to call for people and personally went to the main courtyard. She didn't think that something like this would happen. She didn't think that her daughter would be so bold. As the host, she actually plotted against a guest. If this matter were to spread, how would the Ruan family establish itself here in the future? The beautiful woman clenched her fists. Her heart was filled with worry and fear. Could her daughter survive in that kind of place? She didn't think too much and immediately walked out. She hurried home to discuss with her husband. When the Ruan family's head heard the news, he was also shocked. What? They actually tricked the Xia family's daughter into the Earth spiritual formation and into the 10,000 poison forest. He stood up with a serious expression and walked around the hall. Husband, we have to think of a way to salvage the situation. Quickly send some people in to look. Who knows, we might be able to find Sia. The Ruan family's head mother said with a face full of guilt, "It's all my fault. If I didn't invite them here, this wouldn't have happened." The Ruan family's head mother said, "I'm afraid that even if we send people in, they won't be able to save her. In that kind of place, how can a little girl in the foundation establishment stage survive? Then what should we do? If something really happens to her, I'm afraid." She was a little worried that things would get out of hand. "We can only send some people in to search. As for whether we can find him or not, that will depend on fate." The Ruan family head shook his head and rubbed his temples tiredly. Originally, he wanted to befriend the Sia family, but now it had turned out like this. It was really beyond his expectations. If something really happened to the daughter of the Sia family, then the Ruan family would be unable to absolve themselves from the blame. He immediately sent a group of people into the Earth's spiritual array to search. Not long after this matter was arranged, he heard from the housekeeper outside that Xia Yan from the Xia family had come to visit. A storm was brewing outside, and the atmosphere was tense. In the forest, Fengzhou and the rest were resting under a tree. They had been walking all the way. She was not tired, but Sha Yutang was nervous, worried and perturbed. "Sister, is your leg better? Does it still hurt?" Sha Yutang asked. "It still hurts a little when I move." Xia Shirsi, who was sitting on the ground, looked embarrassed. The food she had eaten at the banquet had already been digested. As she was thinking, her stomach began to growl. Chapter 2640. I took a few at the banquet. You can eat them. Sha Yutang handed them over and looked around, for fear that a fierce beast would rush out from somewhere. Seeing this, Fengzhou restrained her breath. After a while, she heard a rustling sound around. She ignored it and just looked at Sha Yutang, who was nervous. He stood up suddenly and stood in front of his sister. He bent down and said, "Sister, come up quickly. There are fierce beasts." Xia Shirsi was shocked when she heard this. She was about to stand up and lie on her brother's back, but Fengzhou held her. "There are several fierce beasts around. Now we can't run away. How can we not fight?" Fengzhou said, holding Xia Shirsi and said, "I'll help you take care of your sister. You deal with those fierce beasts." While speaking, he grabbed Xia Shirsi's shoulder with one hand and jumped to the tree with her. Sha Yutang was stunned. He looked up and saw them sitting in the tree. He couldn't help asking, "Are you watching from above? Let me fight with those fierce beasts by myself. How can I beat them alone? Can't beat them. Do you want your sister to be eaten? Or do you want to be the food of those fierce beasts?" Fengzhou asked coldly. He didn't plan to go down. They couldn't go there. However, if it were the beautiful woman, she would find them. They had walked for a long time. This place was just right for them to rest and let Sha Yutang practice. Ow! Suddenly, with a roar of a beast, a majestic beast rushed out. Sha Yutang screamed and immediately pulled out his long sword to cut at it. Feng Jiu watched from the top of the tree. She saw that he was so frightened that he was at a loss. Even the long sword in his hand was slashing wildly, and in this chaos, he actually killed one of the ferocious beasts. The corner of her mouth twitched when she saw this. Sure enough, he was an old master who had been beaten to death by random fists. It was really rare for him to be able to live until today with just a few moves. Hiss! Sha Yutang's arm was scratched and blood oozed out, dyeing his robe red. Fengzhou just sat there and watched. On one hand, he wanted to let him fight with these vicious beasts and gain experience. On the other hand, if the Ruan clan sent people in, they should be here soon. It would be strange if the three of them didn't even have a single wound on their bodies. Brother! Be careful. Circe watched from the tree. Seeing that his arm was scratched, she couldn't help but worry. Roar! Hiss! He cried out in pain. His back was burning with pain. Looking at the two beasts attacking him from the front and back, he endured the pain and swung his sword again. The strength of Foundation establishment cultivators was ordinary. If they were compared to people of the same level, they could already be considered good. However, the level of the ferocious beasts here wasn't low. Chapter 2641. Brother. Circe limped forward and looked at the bloody wounds on his body. Her eyes could not help but redden. Brother, does it hurt? I'll apply medicine for you, she said in a choked voice, while looking for the medicine from the space. Shi Yutong's hand holding the sword was trembling. He looked at Fingzhou, and his body was still tight. I killed those beasts. Well, I saw it. Fingzhou said, reaching out and patting him on the shoulder. You did a good job. Hearing this, Shi Yutong's whole body softened, and then he fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Circe wanted to help him apply medicine and bandage, but Fingzhou took her hand and said, sit aside. I'll do it. She stepped forward to help Shi Yutong clean the wounds on his body, and then applied medicine and bandaged them. After bandaging the wounds, she went to the two beasts, dug out their beast crystals and handed them to him. These are your trophies. Shi Yutong held the two beast crystals in his hand and couldn't help but be stunned. He calmed down and was excited, only feeling that there was a blood boiling in his body. These were his trophies. It turned out that as long as he overcame the fear in his heart, he could also fight against the beasts. Fingzhou, 2 beasts died, and my brother was injured. The smell of blood is so strong. Will it attract other beasts? Do we need to leave now? Circe asked worriedly. Now her brother was injured, and her foot was sprained. It was not easy for her to walk. Only Fingzhou was left. If there were really beasts smelling blood, then, Fengzhou smiled slightly. She glanced at Shi Yutong and said to Circe, your brother killed 2 ferocious beasts. Not only was he injured, but he also consumed a lot of energy. Now it's time for him to rest here. I'll cut the meat of the beasts and roast some for you to eat to replenish your strength. Then, what if there are more beasts? She was still a little worried. Don't worry. It won't. As long as she released the ancient aura in her body, those ferocious beasts wouldn't dare to come close. Hearing him say this, the 2 of them didn't say anything, but their hearts were still in their throats. The smell of blood was so strong, how could it not attract other ferocious beasts? Because of the worry in their hearts, even if they were resting here at this time, the 2 of them didn't dare to be careless. Instead, they vigilantly paid attention to the surrounding movements. Fingzhou picked up some branches and began to get busy. The 2 siblings sat under the tree and watched as Fingzhou moved skillfully, as if he had done it 1,000 times. They couldn't help but be slightly surprised. Did you often barbecue before? Shi Yutong asked. Hearing this, Fingzhou looked at them and smiled. If you don't even have survival skills in the wild, how can you survive until now? The brother and sister watched as she casually waved her hand and the flames leaped up. Their eyes couldn't help but flicker. Fire attribute. Fingzhou is a fire elemental. They hadn't seen him use it along the way. The smell of blood here was so strong that it caused the nearby beasts to become restless. They quietly approached, but when they reached a certain distance, they stopped and did not dare to move forward. They only let out low growls and stared ahead with a trace of fear in their ferocious and bloodthirsty eyes. Chapter 2642. Ferocious Beasts. Sha Yutong whispered, staring ahead with his sword in one hand. Fingzhou, who was turning the barbecue, said without looking back, "There are ferocious beasts here. It's not surprising to hear the roar of beasts." She cut a piece of barbecue, wrapped it in a big leaf and handed it to Sha Yutong. "Take it." Seeing this, Sha Yutong took the barbecue and found that there were only sounds of fierce beasts around, but there was no trace of fierce beasts. He gradually relaxed and said, "Sister, you eat first." He handed the barbecue to her. "Brother, you eat it. I'll eat it later," Xie Shirsi said. Smelling the aroma of the barbecue, she limped to Fingzhou's side and sat down. "Why does it smell so good? I've never smelled such delicious barbecue before." Hearing this, Fingzhou chuckled. "That's right. Don't you know who barbecued it?" Hearing this, Xie Shirsi also laughed. "Fingzhou, you're so good. You're not afraid in here. You cook delicious food for us. You're so nice." Sha Yutong also stepped forward and sat down by the fire. Looking at Fingzhou, who cut a piece of barbecue with a knife and handed it to his sister with a smile, he felt a little strange. "Yes. Why aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid that the ferocious beasts will eat us?" "I'm afraid. But you're here, aren't you?" She glanced at him with a smile in her eyes. Sha Yutong wanted to say something, but when he heard this, he couldn't say anything. He was here. Did he think that he was strong enough to protect her? Looking at Fingzhou's fearless face with a smile at this time, Sha Yutong twitched the corner of his mouth and couldn't help thinking, it's not that he's not afraid, but that he doesn't know fear at all. Fingzhou cut a piece of meat and ate it. Then he took out the wine from the space and took a sip, looking satisfied. "You still have wine. I want a drink too," Sha Yutong said, reaching out to take it, but Fingzhou avoided him. "The injured can't drink." Fingzhou glanced at him with a smile. Hearing this, Sha Yutong looked down at his wounds, moved his lips, and finally just muttered, "Stingy." He took big bites of the barbecued meat, and when he swallowed the meat, he actually felt a trace of spiritual power flowing through his body. "What?" His eyes were full of surprise. "I've eaten meat before, but it seemed that I didn't feel it this time." "How do you feel?" Fengzhou tore off a piece of meat and asked. "It's the spirit energy from the roast meat that's circulating in my body. That's normal. The beast meat you usually eat isn't of a high grade, but the two beasts you killed this time are of a high grade, so their spiritual aura is naturally extraordinary." She glanced at the two of them and said, "Eat more, it'll be good for you." Xie Shirsi's eyes lit up. I another piece SSSS. "Okay, I'll cut it for you." She smiled and cut another piece for her. "We can take it away if we can't finish it." Chapter 2643. "Of course, we will leave here alive." She looked at them and said, "Danger is also an opportunity. Just like this time, if you hadn't tried it, how could you know that you could kill the two beasts? Even if you encounter another beast, you can continue to kill it." She paused for a moment, then smiled and said, "Besides, this is a rare opportunity to gain experience. You should cherish it. Like I said, you might be able to contract a contract beast here." Hearing Fingzhou's words, the brother and sister looked at each other and asked, "Can we?" "Of course, as long as you want to, there is nothing you can't do." She encouraged them with a smile. Seeing this, the brother and sister did not speak anymore, but began to eat. After eating, they rested here for a while. Sure enough, as Fengzhou said, not a single fierce beast approached them, and not a single one appeared. Although they were puzzled, they didn't think too much about it since they couldn't figure it out. I'm going to take this beast back and let my father, mother and grandpa know that I killed it. Sha Yutang said and put the beast into the space ring. After a rest, they put out the fire and left. Because the trees in the forest were messy, it was not easy to use a flying magic weapon. Xie Shirsi's ankle was not well, so she had to be carried by Sha Yutang. However, he was also injured, so it was a little difficult for him to carry a person through the forest. Fengjiu looked at him and asked, "How is it? Are you okay?" "Of course," Sha Yutang said, walking step by step with his sister on his back. The sweat on his forehead oozed out and dripped into the grass. "I'll carry my sister myself. Don't think about taking advantage of her." Hearing this, Fengjiu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Well, you carry her. I won't ask more." Taking advantage of her? What advantage could she take? "Brother, why don't you put me down? You can help me walk." Seeing that her brother had to carry her even though he was injured, she felt very apologetic. "No, I'll carry you," Sha Yutang said in a muffled voice and walked step by step. He didn't make a sound even when his clothes were wet with sweat, which made Fengjiu look at him in a new light. It was just past noon. Even though there were trees blocking the sun, it was still a little stuffy in the forest. They didn't walk fast, but when they met ferocious beasts along the way, Sha Yutang was ready to let his sister down so that she could fight. However, those ferocious beasts stared at them for a while and then ran away. Why would those ferocious beasts stare at us for a while before turning around and running away? Xie Shirsi asked, somewhat puzzled. Who knows? Fengjiu shrugged her shoulders. She bit onto the green dog's tail grass to show that she didn't understand. When she caught a glimpse of a venomous snake sticking out its tongue and trying to bite Xie Shirsi, she immediately threw the green dog's tail grass that she was biting towards the venomous snake. Ah! Snake! Xie Shirsi happened to see it and couldn't help but tighten her grip on her brother's neck as she cried out in alarm. But in the next moment, she saw the poisonous snake fall from mid-air into the weeds. Its body twitched for a moment before it died. Chapter 2644. The rhizome of the green foxtail grass was only a little bigger than a needle. More importantly, it was a grass, not a needle. However, a piece of green foxtail grass that could be easily snapped was able to pierce through the body of that poisonous snake. Just how much inner chi did he have to be able to do this? For a moment, he looked at Fengjiu and couldn't say a word for a long time. The things that he couldn't figure out and ignored came to his mind again one by one. Why in this forest full of ferocious beasts, those ferocious beasts stared at them for a while, then turned around and left? Why would they not be in danger as long as Fengjiu was with them? Why could they survive until now after falling here? These scenes flashed through his mind one by one. Thinking of the dangers he had secretly solved for them along the way, he only felt shocked. No wonder he was not afraid or panicked even if he fell into this strange and dangerous place. In such an environment, there was only one reason why he could not be afraid or panicked, that was, he had enough ability to protect himself. Fengjiu didn't know what he was thinking. She just stepped forward, took out a knife, took out the snake's gallbladder, and put it into a small bottle. Seeing that he still stood still, she was slightly surprised and glanced at him. What's wrong? Sha Yutang carried his sister on his back, and they looked at Fengjiu, who was in a daze. For a long time, Sha Yutang opened his mouth slightly and wanted to ask, I'm a little thirsty. I want to sit down and drink some water. Well, let's go ahead. Let's rest under the tree. She pointed to an empty place in front of her and said. As soon as her voice fell, she took the lead and stepped forward. Sha Yutang hurriedly followed her with his sister on his back. When they arrived there, He put her down and took a few sips of water. Then he glanced at Fengjiu and lowered his head again. No one knew what he was thinking. Well? Fengjiu suddenly raised her eyebrows and stood up. What's wrong? Seeing this, Sha Yutang also stood up, holding the sword in his hand and guarding his sister behind him. There seems to be someone. Fengjiu said and released her divine awareness to explore a place. After a while, she took back her divine awareness and smiled. It seems that we can leave here. Someone. Who is it? Is it someone sent by the Ruan family to find us? Sha Yutang asked. No, it should be some family disciples who come here to experience. Fengjiu said, since there are family disciples who come here, it proves that there are other ways to leave here in addition to the transmission formation. Let's go. Let's go and ask. Hearing his words, Yutang's F. A. And people. And. Not long after, when they saw the figure coming out of the rustling weeds, they couldn't help but be stunned. Among them, a young man in front of them snapped, "Who are you?" Seeing that there were really people, the brother and sister of the Xia family were very happy. They glanced at Fengjiu and said, "We are from the Xia family, because..." Before they finished speaking, they were interrupted by Fengjiu. Chapter 26:45. Her voice paused, and her gaze swept past the young people, then landed on the old man and the middle-aged man behind them. She said, "I didn't expect to meet people here, so I thought I'd come over to ask. May I ask, how do we get out of here?" Hearing Fengjiu's words, the people from the clan didn't answer. Instead, they stared at the three of them and sized them up. The young man who spoke was dressed in green, and his appearance was ordinary. On the other hand, the young man and young girl behind him had outstanding appearances, and their robes were also extraordinary. However, the young man's body was stained with blood, and he seemed to have suffered a lot of injuries. Yet, he was still carrying the young girl on his back. The young girl wasn't wearing simple training clothes in the forest, but a gauze dress. Compared to the young man and young girl, the unremarkable young man in green with a simple and honest expression between his brows looked more like a servant. However, the Xia clan. Which Xia clan? The three of them weren't very strong, and they were all in the Foundation establishment realm. Yet, they dared to enter this place. They didn't know what kind of clan the Xia clan was. They actually allowed such weak disciples to enter such a place. It had to be known that even the weakest disciple in their group was already in the Golden Core realm. This forest of 1,000 poisons is full of danger, and ferocious beasts roam about. You dare to come here to train with such strength. You even got separated from your clan. A young man said as he sized them up. How did you survive until now? This question was a little rude. However, other than Fengjiu's group, the people from the clan didn't feel that there was anything wrong with this question. Well, their strength was right in front of them, and they were only 3 Foundation establishment realm cultivators. How could they be worthy of their attention? However, one of the young men walked out after sizing up Fengjiu's group for a moment. He walked in front of the old man and the middle-aged man. He said, "First elder, uncle's son," the 3 of them looked to be in their teens. It's indeed dangerous here without the protection of their clan. We also have to go back, so why don't we bring them along? Their clan will definitely be grateful to us when they find out in the future. In his opinion, these 3 little Foundation establishment cultivators were too weak. If they didn't have a powerful person to protect them, they wouldn't be able to walk out of this forest alive. As for them, these 3 people weren't a threat to them. Naturally, they didn't have to worry about whether they were plotting something. The old man exchanged glances with the middle-aged man, and then they spoke for a while. In the end, the middle-aged man stood up and said, "We're from the Southern Ridges Guo clan. You're lucky to have encountered us here. We're about to head back, so come with us." Hearing this, the Xie siblings were overjoyed and immediately expressed their thanks. "Thank you, senior." Only then did they walk up to the Guo family. The younger generation of the Guo family sat back down, but their eyes were still on the three of them. On this trip, all of their clan members were men, and no women followed them. When they saw such a delicate young girl, they couldn't help but take a few more glances. As for the green-clothed Fingzhou, they completely ignored him. "Are you siblings?" the middle-aged man asked, his gaze falling on the Xie siblings. Chapter 2646. Who is this? the middle-aged man asked. "His name is Fingzhou. He's with me," Sha Yutang said hurriedly and glanced at Fengzhou. Seeing that Fengzhou just smiled and stood aside without speaking, Sha Yutang was relieved secretly. "Since you want to go out with us, then you have to abide by our rules. You can't run around and cause trouble for us," the middle-aged man said and gestured, "Sit down and rest for a while." With that, he no longer looked at them and returned to sit beside the old man. "Thank you, senior." Sha Yutang grinned and glanced at Fingzhou. Then he sat down and had a rest. The others just glanced at them and didn't say anything. The young man who had spoken before came forward and asked Sha Yutang, "Is Miss Xie's foot seriously injured? Did you apply medicine?" "Yes, I did. I applied medicine for my sister." Sha Yutang stood up and saluted him with a fist and palm salute. "Thank you for speaking up for us." The young man smiled and said, "My name is Guo Xinning. I'm a few years older than you. You can call me Brother Guo." "Brother Guo." Sha Yutang called him with a smile. Xie Shixi quickly glanced at the gentleman in front of her, lowered her head slightly and whispered, "Brother Guo." Fingzhou looked at this scene with a simple and honest look and smile on his face. She just wanted to ask them how to get out of here, and then they would leave by themselves. Unexpectedly, she ended up with them. Well, in this case, just let them be. She sat aside and listened to Guo Xinning and Sha Yutang talking there. Then she looked at him quietly. She saw that this man was dressed in black clothes with a sword on his belt. His black hair was tied up high. His face was like jade, and his temperament was gentle. His behavior revealed the aura of a noble young master. She couldn't help glancing at Xie Shixi and laughing in her heart. Guo Xinning's appearance was handsome, his words were full of concern, and his actions exuded the aura of a noble young master. It was no wonder that this little girl's cheeks were red and her eyes were filled with lust. It seemed that she was moved by love. However, just by looking at the cultivation and aura of this group of people, one could tell that they were definitely from a large aristocratic family. Especially this Guo Xinning, he was probably a member of the direct line of descent who was highly valued. The little girl's heart was palpitating with eagerness. This was not a good thing. "All right, let's get ready to continue our journey." The old man and the middle-aged man stood up. As soon as they spoke, the surrounding disciples also stood up. Sha Yutang carried his sister on his back and followed them. Fengzhou walked beside them. Guo Xinning, who was walking in front, saw them walking behind and walked towards them. "Follow me to the front. It's safer to walk in the middle," Guo Xinning said warmly, wanting to lead them forward. "I don't think that's a good idea." Chapter 2647. The sweat on his forehead oozed out, and he looked very tired. Seeing this, Guo Xinning, who was walking next to him, glanced at Sha Yutang strangely, and then looked at Fengzhou, who was walking easily beside him. He couldn't help but wonder, why don't you let Fengzhou carry you? You are still injured. You can't stand it if you continue to carry her like this. How can I let other men carry my sister? It's not polite. Sha Yutang said. He was sweating and panting, but he didn't slow down, let alone let Fengzhou help him. In his opinion, his sister was a girl who would marry in the future. If she let other men carry her casually, it would damage her reputation. As her brother, he naturally couldn't let that happen. Hearing Sha Yutang's words, Guo Xining was a little surprised. Then he smiled and didn't say anything more. He just looked at Sha Yutang with more appreciation. Fengzhou walked next to him. Listening to Sha Yutang's words, he just smiled. Walking with the Guo family's team, she found that the old man and the middle-aged man leading the way in front were very experienced. When mist appeared in some places, they would avoid the mist. When they encountered some ferocious beasts in the forest, as long as the two people in front made a gesture, the young men behind them would set up a formation and prepare to fight. Along the way, she saw that they avoided 2 poisonous mists and killed 3 groups of about 10 fierce beasts, and no one was injured or killed. They followed the Guo family's people. On the other side, a team sent by the Ruan family also entered the forest through the transmission formation to look for Xia Shirsi. However, it was not easy to find them in such a large forest. The beautiful woman who had returned to the Xia family was sitting in the yard in a daze. Her eyes were slightly swollen, and it was obvious that she had just cried. When she heard the movement outside the yard, she quickly looked over and saw her husband coming back. She quickly stepped forward and asked, "How is it? What did the Xia family say?" "The Xia family has sent a team to look for her." Xia Yan sighed, hugged her and gently patted her on the shoulder. "Don't worry." "How can I not be worried? Little Shi is just a girl. Let alone a girl, even an adult wouldn't be able to survive in that kind of place." She covered her ears and threw herself into his arms, sobbing softly, "It's all my fault, it's all my fault. You can't be blamed for this. If you want to blame someone, you have to blame the 3rd daughter of the Ruan family. She didn't know her limits." He said in a low voice, his eyes fierce, "If anything happens to little Shi, I will definitely make her pay with her life." The beautiful woman cried for a while before suddenly stopping. She withdrew from his embrace and asked, "Where's our son, Xiaozhou? Didn't you find the 2 of them?" "No." Xia Yan shook his head and said, "This matter is strange. The gatekeeper of the Xia family said that they didn't leave, but we couldn't find them in the Xia family residence. Even the shadow guards in the Xia family residence didn't notice their whereabouts. We don't know where they went." Hearing this, the beautiful woman was slightly startled. She thought for a moment and said with some hesitation, "Do you think the 2 of them also entered the Ruan clan's earth spirit formation?" Chapter 2648. Hearing this, the beautiful woman wept again. "Xiaoshi is in danger. I don't know whether she is alive or dead. Yutang and Xiaozhou are missing. It's all my fault. If I had known it would be like this, I wouldn't have taken them to the Ruan family. Don't blame yourself. Maybe they'll be back safely in a few days." At this point, he could only comfort her like this. On the other side, the sky in the forest gradually darkened. As the sky gradually darkened, the Guo family team also stopped. "Let's rest here tonight. Xining, you arrange for people to take turns to keep watch. Xinjie, you take a few people to pick up some branches nearby." The middle-aged man said, handing over the matter to them, and then sat cross-legged under the tree with the old man to practice. Guo Xining arranged for people to keep watch, and another young man took a few people to pick up branches. When passing by Sha Yutang and the other 2, He stopped and said to Fingzhou, "Boy, you come with us." "Okay." Fingzhou responded, stood up and said to Sha Yutang and his sister, "You take a rest. I'll pick up some branches." Then he followed them. "Just pick them up around here. Don't go too far," Guoxinjie said, but he leaned against a tree to rest with his hands around his chest. Fingzhou picked up a handful of branches around and was ready to go back. However, when she was about to go back, Guoxinjie, who was resting under the tree, came to her. "Boy, this is not enough. Go and pick up some more. I'll take these back first." He reached out and took the branches picked up by Fingzhou, and glanced at Fingzhou provocatively. "What are you looking at? Go." Looking at the branches being taken away by him, Fingzhou said nothing, and turned to continue to pick up branches. Seeing this, the man sneered, and then winked at others, and they went back first. The branches around were picked up by others. If she wanted to pick up enough branches for tonight, she had to go a little farther. Thus, after looking back, she walked further away. In the resting place, Sha Yutang was a little worried when he saw that Fingzhou didn't come back. He looked back and wanted to find him, but he was worried about his sister. "Where did Fingzhou go? Why did you come back?" he said in a low voice. He couldn't sit still and started walking. "Brother, why don't you go take a look? Don't go too far alone. It's dangerous," Xie Shixi said. She was a little worried. "But you..." His sister's foot injury had not yet healed. How could he be at ease if he let her stay here alone? "Yutang, what's wrong?" After Guoxinning had finished arranging matters, he walked over and saw the worried expressions on the Xie siblings' faces. He swept his gaze around and did not see any trace of the green-clothed youth. He asked, "Where's Fingzhou?" "Big brother Guo," the two of them called out. Sha Yutang said, "I just followed them to pick up branches, but Fingzhou hasn't come back yet. I'm a little worried." Hearing this, Guoxinning said, "I'll ask him." He walked to the young man who was sitting under the tree and talking and laughing with several men, and asked, "Xinjie, where's Fingzhou? Didn't he go to pick up branches with you? Why hasn't he come back yet?" Chapter 2649. Seeing this, Guoxinning frowned slightly. He took a deep look at him, turned around and walked back to Sha Yutang and his sister without saying anything. "You don't have to worry. I'll go and have a look," he said and walked into the forest. Seeing this, Xie Shixi looked at the figure and whispered to her brother, Brother Guo is so nice." "Well, he's very generous." Sha Yutang agreed. Some distance away from here, Fingzhou saw a small spring here when she was picking up branches. After washing her face, she took off her boots and soaked her feet. The cold spring water penetrated her skin, and the comfortable feeling made her squint her eyes and smile happily. When Guoxinning came, he saw the cyan figure sitting on a stone, with his hands slightly behind him, looking up at the sky, squinting comfortably and smiling happily. Looking at the smile on the young man's ordinary face, he couldn't help but stop and his eyes flashed slightly. He only felt that the young man seemed to be covered with a layer of light at this moment, and the comfortable and pleasant smile on his face made him unable to move his eyes away. Therefore, when the smiling young man suddenly retracted his smile and turned around to look at him, their eyes met and he was caught off guard. Looking into those clear and serene eyes, he felt as if he had fallen into an abyss and was unable to extricate himself for a long time. Feng Jiu frowned imperceptibly. She glanced at Guoxinning who was standing not far away and staring at her in a daze. Then, she retracted her gaze and withdrew her feet from the cool spring water. She took out a piece of cloth from the space to dry the water stains and put on her boots. Then, she picked up the branch on the side and walked towards Guaxining. Do you need to get some water? There's a spring there. As Feng Zhou spoke, she saw him staring at her in astonishment. Only then did she remember that she had just soaked her feet there. She couldn't help but smile embarrassedly. Although I soaked my feet there, the water was running and flowed down. As she spoke, she walked back and said, I'll go back first. Seeing the young man passing by him and walking back, Guaxining was stunned. It took him a long time to recover. He shook his head and laughed. After looking at the spring, he followed the young man back. Feng Zhou, you're back. Why did you take so long? I thought something had happened to you. Sha Yutang saw him come back and quickly came to his side. It's okay. I just went far away when I was picking up branches and found a spring, so I washed my face and came back. She smiled and glanced at Guaxingjie. When Guaxingjie saw that Feng Zhou had returned, he snorted and looked away, not looking at him again. Brother Guo went to find you. Did you meet him? Xia Shirsi looked up and asked. Hearing this, Feng Zhou pursed her lips and smiled. She glanced at her and said, Yes, he should be behind me. As she spoke, she looked back and saw Guaxining walking back slowly not far away. Seeing this, Xia Shirsi couldn't help laughing, and her face overflowed with a smile. Sha Yutang saw his sister like this and couldn't help but be stunned. He took a deep look at her and then looked at Feng Zhou. No one knew what he was thinking. You go and sit down. I'll pile up the branches and light them when it's dark. Feng Zhou said and put the branches next to the place where they were sitting. Chapter 2650. His eyes were deep, with 30% inquiry and 70% curiosity. When the Xia siblings saw him staring at Feng Nine, they couldn't help but be startled. They followed his gaze and glanced at Feng Nine. They didn't know what he was looking at. Feng Zhou, who was tidying up the branches, naturally noticed it, but he didn't pay attention to it. He didn't even look back. Brother Guo, do you want to eat fruit? I have fruit here. Xia Shirsi said, taking out the fruit her brother gave her and handing it to him. Guaxining came to his senses, looked away from Feng Zhou, and looked at Xia Shirsi with a gentle smile. No, you can keep it for yourself. He nodded to them, then left and went back to the front. Seeing this, Xia Shirsi couldn't help lowering her head with a sad look. Sister, do you like Brother Guo? Sha Yutang hesitated, but still asked in a low voice. They were sitting here, and no one noticed them, so what they said didn't attract the attention of others. Hearing this, Xia Shirsi looked up at her brother in a panic. No, brother, why do you ask? Although she didn't say anything, her flickering eyes and flustered look couldn't fool Sha Yutang. He looked at Guaxining, who was wearing a black robe and talking to the middle-aged man, and said to his sister, Little Shi, Brother Guo is already a cultivator at the peak of Yuanying stage. His cultivation is all achieved by himself, not with the help of elixirs, and his status in the Guo family is also very extraordinary. He didn't say it clearly, just told her where the gap between him and them was, and hoped that his sister could understand. How could a young girl's heart not be moved by a man who was so outstanding in terms of appearance, temperament, or strength? However, they were only collateral relatives in the Xia family. What's more, he didn't think there was anything special about them. As friends, it might be okay, but in terms of marriage, he felt that his sister was still not in the eyes of the Guo family. It was not that he looked down on his sister, but that all the conditions were in front of him. Feng Zhou smirked as he listened from behind. This silly boy was quite insightful. It seemed that he had made some progress after suffering so much. Xia Shirsi lowered her head with a sad expression and replied softly, I understand, big brother. Sha Yutong didn't say anything more. He just looked at Fingzhou and said, "Let's light the fire, too. After walking for a whole day, I want to eat some meat to replenish my energy." "All right." Fingzhou replied with a smile. He took out a match and lit the twigs. Then, he took out the roasted meat that they had roasted today and heated it up before eating. Smelling the aroma of the meat, the people who were roasting the meat at the two bonfires couldn't help but turn around to look. They saw that it was the young man and his three companions who had gotten a piece of roasted meat from somewhere and were eating it. Chapter 26:51. Here you are. Sha Yutong reacted, cut off a piece of barbecue, wrapped it in leaves and handed it to him. Guo Xining took it with a smile, thanked him, and sat down by their small fire. He didn't pick up the whole piece to bite, but took out a knife to cut off a small piece to eat. His behavior exuded elegance and nobility, which made Sha Yutong blush. Why did he look so elegant and nobility when he was eating? It seemed that he was not having a picnic in the mountains, but at the dinner table at home. His every move was noble, which made Sha Yutong feel a little ashamed. Sha Yutong was also from the Xie family. Although he was a collateral relative, his family was not bad. Compared with him, it was really obvious who was better. "It's very fragrant," Guo Xining said with a smile. "It's rare to eat such delicious food outside. This is barbecued by Fingzhou. He is really good at barbecuing," Sha Yutong said, looking at Fingzhou who was eating barbecued meat. Hearing this, Guo Xining looked at the young man who was sitting and eating barbecued meat in surprise. Seeing that he was eating by himself and didn't even look at him, Guo Xining thought of something and said, "Fingzhou, your barbecued meat is very fragrant. Did you add spices?" Inexplicably, he wanted to talk to the young man. Fingzhou glanced at him, chewing barbecued meat in his mouth, and answered vaguely, "Yes." Seeing this, Guo Xining's eyes moved slightly. He looked at the young man's bulging cheeks moving as he chewed, like a cute little squirrel, which made him feel a little strange. How could a young man make him feel cute? Obviously, the young man's appearance was not outstanding, but he attracted his attention. Being stared at like this, Fingzhou couldn't eat even if he had a good appetite. She ate the barbecued meat in her hand quickly, wiped her mouth, and stood up. "I'm done. Take your time." Seeing that she turned around and was about to leave, Sha Yutong quickly asked, "Where are you going? Don't run around at night." "I'm not running around. I'm going to rest in the tree." She pointed at the big tree behind them. As soon as she finished speaking, she leaped onto the tree. Guo Xining watched his figure lightly jump up the tree and find a place to rest. He couldn't help but smile. He looks very free and easy. Free and easy. Sha Yutong was stunned and then laughed. How is he free and easy? I think he's just heartless. He doesn't even worry about danger. Xie Shixi noticed that Guo Xining's attention was on Fingzhou. She couldn't help but lower her head to look at herself. She didn't look bad either. But why didn't Brother Guo's eyes fall on her? Why hadn't he paid any attention to her? Guo Xinjie, who had overheard their conversation, came forward after learning that the barbecue they were eating was made by Fingzhou. He stood under the tree and raised his head to look at the sleeping youth. "Fingzhou, since you know how to barbecue, come down and help us barbecue some." Hearing this, Sha Yutong just frowned slightly, but didn't speak. They went with them and were protected by them. If they wanted to help them barbecue, he really didn't know how to refuse. Guo Xining stood up and said, "I think the barbecue is almost ready. Why do we need his help?" Chapter 26:52. Hearing the man's words, Fingzhou jumped down from the tree and took out a small bottle. This is seasoning, just sprinkle it on the meat. As he spoke, he handed the bottle of seasoning to Fingzhou, but Fingzhou did not take it. Since you have nothing to do, since you know how to roast, come and help us roast it, so that we don't sprinkle too much or too little, and the taste won't be good. As Guoxinjie spoke, his gaze fell on Fingzhou, as if he knew that Fingzhou would not dare to refuse. Seeing that Fingzhou did not move and only looked at him, Guoxinjie laughed. What? Do you think I can't ask for your help? Although he was laughing, there was no smile in his eyes. On the contrary, the contempt and provocation between his brows were clear. Hearing this, Fingzhou revealed a simple and honest smile. No, it's just that, I'm a little worried. Worried about what? Guoxinjie asked. I'm worried that if you guys eat the food I roast, if something happens, it will be my fault. I really don't want to do such a thankless task, she said with a troubled expression. Hearing this, Guoxinjie laughed. Do you think all of us don't have eyes? Do you think we'll have the chance to let you do anything? So, if anything happens, it has nothing to do with me. She smiled and asked. Nonsense, what can happen? When it's done, you can cut off a piece and eat it. I don't believe that you'll dare to do anything. He snorted lightly, indicating for Fingzhou to follow him. Fengzhou smiled and swept her gaze across the surroundings. When she saw that everyone's gazes had landed on her, it was obvious that they had heard their words. Hence, she did not say anything else and followed Guoxinjie to the side of the fire where the barbecued meat was being roasted. Guoxining also walked over and came to Fingzhou's side. Seeing that he took out the bottle, Guoxining handed it to him. He was startled and asked, What are you doing? Checking it. This is a normal seasoning. Get someone to check it, in case they say that I put some random things in you guys. Hearing this, Guoxining wanted to tell him that there was no need. However, seeing that everyone's eyes were on him, he took it to the middle-aged man in front of him. Not long after, he returned. Uncle Sun has checked it, it is indeed a seasoning to add the fragrance of the meat. As he spoke, he handed the bottle back to Fingzhou. Thus, Fingzhou took a small knife from the side and cut a small cut on the roast meat and sprinkled the seasoning. The surrounding people sat and chatted as they watched him roast the meat. When the rich aroma of meat wafted through the air, everyone couldn't help but swallow their saliva as they looked at the barbecued meat on the rack. The golden crispy skin exuded a strong meaty aroma. That smell really made people salivate. Their gazes shifted away from the ordinary-looking young man. They didn't know that this young man had such skills. Chapter 2653. Seeing him coming back, Sha Yutang moved his lips and said apologetically, I'm sorry, it's all our fault. If it weren't for us, you wouldn't have to barbecue for them. He lowered his head. Along the way, he faintly guessed that Fingzhou's strength was above him, but he didn't know how powerful it was. But he knew that Fingzhou would not agree to barbecue for them at ordinary times. It was because of them that he bowed his head. Hearing this, Fingzhou was slightly stunned, and then said with a smile, It doesn't matter. Anyway, I have nothing to do. She smiled, sat down by the fire, and said to him, You need to change the medicine on your wounds. Come on, let me help you. Oh. Sha Yutang didn't say anything more. He just took off his coat obediently, revealing the wounds tied inside. What should I do? There is only one bottle of medicine left. Xie Shirsi frowned, worried that the wounds would not be healed after the medicine was used up. I have some here. Put away your bottle first, Fengzhou said. After untying the bandage on Sha Yutang's wound, she checked the wound and took out a bottle from the space to apply it to him. When she saw that the more serious wound was festering because of sweat and the hot weather, she frowned slightly. The wound is festering. It needs to be treated again. It's okay. Just put some medicine on it. He also knew that there was no condition here, so he could only bandage it simply. Fengjiu glanced at him, then took out a knife and said, "I'll help you remove the rotten flesh." While speaking, she burned the knife on the fire. Hearing his words, Xie Shirsi and Xie Shirsi's faces changed slightly. "Remove? You, how can you do that?" He didn't know medicine. How could she use a knife to remove his flesh? How dare he? Looking at the sharp knife in Fengjiu's hand, Sha Yutang's face turned pale, and the sweat on his forehead oozed out. No, I think we'd better go back and deal with it. It should be nothing." Before he finished, he was interrupted. "When we go back, your arm will be broken." Fengjiu said lightly and glanced at him. "Are you afraid of pain? You don't dare to let me remove it." Sha Yutang swallowed and said, "It's not about being afraid of pain, okay? You don't even understand." His voice paused and he held his breath. His body stiffened because the person holding the knife didn't wait for him to finish speaking and had already used the knife to cut his wound. Seeing this, his heart tightened and his entire body tensed up. He couldn't say a word. "Relax, don't be nervous. Practice makes perfect. I'll just practice on you more," Fengjiu said casually as he removed the festering flesh from his wound. Sha Yutang stared at him. What did he mean by practice makes perfect, so he had to practice with him more? How could this person be so heartless? His body was tense, but his eyes did not dare to move to the wound. He only stared at the person in front of him. After Fengjiu removed the festering flesh from his wound, she cleaned it up before applying her ointment and bandaging the wound. "All right." She went to the side to wash her hands, then came back and said, "I'll go to sleep first. Call me if you need anything." As soon as she finished speaking, she jumped to the tree to rest. About 50 meters away, pairs of eyes were staring at them with a strange cold light in the night. It was a wolf. Moreover, it was a large pack of wolves. There were no less than 100 pairs of eyes flickering in the darkness. From the looks of it, there were at least 100 wolves. Moreover, they were not ordinary wolves, but rather wolf beasts of a certain level. Chapter 2655. Alert! There's a pack of wolves. The night watchman exclaimed at this time, and the 8 people guarding around quickly retreated. After hearing the exclamation, the sleeping people quickly turned over and jumped up, pulling out the swords at their waists, ready to fight at any time. Just in an instant, the surrounding atmosphere became dignified, and there was a depressing atmosphere in the air. Fengjiu jumped down as soon as they shouted and stood beside Xie Yutang and Xie Yutang. "Fengjiu, there's a pack of wolves." Sha Yutang said nervously. "Well, I know. Carry your sister on your back and follow me. Don't go far." She lowered her voice and said. "Okay." Hearing Fengjiu's words, Sha Yutang gradually calmed down. He quickly carried his sister on his back and stood beside Fengjiu. The Guo family members gradually formed a formation. Their backs were facing the inside while they faced the outside. The tips of their swords were pointed outwards as they stared at their surroundings. As they sensed the movements of the wolves that had been lying in ambush began to inch closer. Worried about Fengjiu and the other 2, Guo Xinning came to them and said, "It's wolf beasts. You have to be careful. Try to stand in the middle and don't get out of our protective circle." As soon as his voice fell, he glanced at Fengjiu. "Okay, we know. Sha Yutang responded. Seeing Guo Xining looking at Fingzhou, he couldn't help but look at Fingzhou, wondering why Guo Xining paid so much attention to Fingzhou. After giving his instructions, Guo Xining left first and returned to the old man and the middle-aged man's side. When they saw the pack of wolves, even though everyone was mentally prepared, they could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. There are hundreds of them, right? A Guo family disciple's voice couldn't help trembling. Hiss. Not only are there hundreds of wolves, but half of them are at the level of holy beasts. Another person gasped and felt the crisis in front of him. They were only a team of 30 or 40 people. How could they fight against hundreds of wolf beasts? Moreover, the level of these wolf beasts was not low. They were afraid that they couldn't help but look at the old man and the middle-aged man. In such a situation, they were not confident that they could win. A whoa! Suddenly, a wolf's howl resounded through the night sky. The howl reverberated in the night, and no one could tell where it came from. However, one thing was certain, it was the Wolf King that had let out the howl. As soon as the wolf howled, the surrounding wolves that were eyeing them covetously let out a low howl. One by one, they pounced forward, baring their fangs as they pounced on the prey in their eyes. The speed of the wolf beasts was extremely fast. As they pounced forward, they raised their claws and fangs at the Guo family members. Coupled with the fact that there were so many of them, the Guo family members were unable to cope with them. Gradually, their formation was broken and chaotic. Hiss. Aw. Swish. Roars, low cries, and the sharp sound of air currents accompanied by the slashing of swords and sabers spread out in the night. Between the flashes of the sabers and the shadows of the swords, blood splattered, and the smell of blood also permeated the air. Don't panic. Stay calm. Hold the formation. The middle-aged man yelled. However, he only saw that everyone was fighting chaotically because of the wolves' attacks. Their formation had long been scattered, and because of this, most of them were scratched by the wolves' claws because they couldn't cope with the wolves' attacks. Chapter 2656. The old man said to the middle-aged man. At the same time, he said to Guo Xining, I'll leave it to you. Hold on. When we defeat the Wolf King, the wolves will retreat. Guo Xining waved his sword to kill a wolf beast and replied, Okay. Elder and uncle's son, be careful. As soon as his voice fell, the two of them rose up and went to find the Wolf King. There were not many of them, plus the large number of wolves, they would be defeated after a long battle. The only way to make the wolves retreat was to defeat the Wolf King. But, he looked at the blood-stained disciples around him. The fierce attack of the wolf beasts made them lose their usual calmness and become a little crazy and flustered. He could not help but worriedly look for the Xie siblings and Feng Zhou in the crowd. Seeing that the three of them had been forced to a corner, he wanted to go over, but he could not get past the crowd to reach them. He could only fight as he walked towards them. Xie Shirsi had never seen so many wolf beasts appear at once, especially when those wolf beasts were baring their sharp teeth and drooling as they pounced on them. Their ferocious and bloodthirsty appearance made her tremble uncontrollably. She clung tightly to her brother's back, not daring to look again. Sha Yutang was still holding a sword in one hand to kill the wolf beasts that rushed up. He obeyed Fingzhou's words and used the big tree behind him as a cover so that there was no worry behind him. He just focused on dealing with the wolf beasts in front of him. However, after all, he was carrying his sister on his back and had to fight with one hand. His physical strength was very limited. After a while, his physical strength gradually couldn't keep up, and the speed of attack and defense naturally slowed down. Seeing a fierce beast rushing over, he was so scared that his face turned pale. But at this time, he saw Fingzhou's sword piercing through the wolf beast's body and throwing it out. Looking at the person in front of him, his heart beat fast and he gasped for breath. He thought he was going to die. "Lean against the tree and rest behind me," Fingzhou said without turning his head. He stood in front of them to protect them from danger. These wolf beasts were child's play to her. However, she did not have any intention of helping the Guo family out of their predicament. Firstly, their battle prowess was not weak, and they would probably only sustain some injuries after this battle. Secondly, with her current status, if she really did something, it would naturally attract unwanted attention and cause unnecessary trouble. Thirdly, it would naturally attract unwanted attention and cause unnecessary trouble. Therefore, it was better to fight. Anyway, she only needed to protect the Xie siblings. As for the others, what did it have to do with her whether they lived or died? With a sweep of her gaze, she glanced at Guoxinjie, whose legs were weak, and the corners of her mouth curled into a smile that was not a smile. Guoxinjie had pooped all night. Now his physical strength had not recovered, and he encountered a pack of wolves. Looking at his bloody wounds, she knew that he was seriously injured. If it weren't for the help of several people around him, he would have been torn apart by the wolves. After fighting for a long time, the Guo family was almost unable to hold on. Even Guo Xining was scratched by the wolf claws. At this time, there was a hasty howl in the night. After hearing the howl, the wolves howled. Although they were unwilling, they finally retreated quickly. Seeing those people and wolf beasts retreating, the Guo family's legs were weak and they fell to the ground. Chapter 2657. In the night, a young man in cyan stood in front of the Xie siblings, holding an inconspicuous long sword in his hand. There was no trace of fear on his face. Behind him, Sha Yutang carried his sister on his back, and there was a trace of panic between his eyebrows. Neither the young man in cyan nor the Xie siblings had any wounds on their bodies. There were only a few bloodstains on their clothes. Looking at the three of them, he was stunned for a moment. He instinctively looked at the surrounding Guo family disciples and saw that not a single one of them was unharmed. Every single one of them was injured to varying degrees. There were even some who were on the verge of death. The strength of those people was far greater than the three of them. Were they not injured because they protected them? As soon as this idea came to him, even he himself wanted to laugh. Not to mention that the Guo family members were injured. Even if they were not injured, as soon as the formation was dispersed and the wolves rushed up, he did not think that the Guo family members would risk their lives to protect them. It's good that they are not injured. After a long time, he just said this sentence and turned to leave to see other injured people. Perhaps because of Guo Xining's eyes and the shock in his eyes, Sha Yutang thought of something. He glanced at the three of them and found that they were indeed not injured. And they were not injured because Fingzhou had been protecting them. Fingzhou, because of Fingzhou again. He looked at the thin figure standing in front of him. Obviously, the figure was not as big as him, but he had been standing in front of him to resolve the danger for them. This time, if it weren't for him, how could they be intact under the attack of the wolves? Brother, put me down. Go and see if they need help. Help them dress their wounds. Xie Shixi only felt that the atmosphere was a little strange, but she did not think much about it. She just whispered to break the strangeness of the moment. Okay. Sha Yutang said, put her down, and said to Fingzhou, you and Xiaoshi rest here. I'll go and see if they need help. Fingzhou nodded and sat down beside Xie Shixi. He took out a piece of cloth and wiped his sword before putting it away. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall, as if he had turned a blind eye to the cries and wails around him. Xie Shixi looked at the badly mangled wounds on their bodies. Some of them had blood staining their clothes, and some of them had their arms torn open by the wolf claws. The wounds were so deep that the bones could be seen. She couldn't help but shrink back in fear. Xiao Zhou, aren't you afraid? Xie Shixi asked softly. Fengjiu opened his eyes and glanced at her. Don't be afraid. Her voice paused, and her gaze fell on the injured and screaming people in front of her. Her voice rang out again, because I have the ability to protect myself. Xie Shixi looked at him in a daze and said, Xiao Zhou, you're amazing. Yes, I'm very powerful. She tilted her head slightly and looked at her, revealing a smile as she spoke. In front of them, Sha Yutang was helping others dress their wounds. Looking at those wounds, his heart was also throbbing. If such injuries had happened at home before, he would have cried and shouted for his father and mother. But when he came here, he realized that these were necessary for people who were out for experience. I'll help you stop the bleeding first. Is there any medicine? Bandage this wound. Sha Yutang's voice came from the crowd. Chapter 2658. Your brother is actually a good person, she said, which was rare of her. When Xie Shixi heard this, she smiled. Yes, my brother is a good person. He treats me very well too. When I was young, he would fight with people who bullied me. Where we used to live, the people in town called him the little bully. Fengjiu smiled and said to her, Take off the medicine on your leg. I'll take a look. Xie Shixi was slightly startled. Now? Actually, my leg is only sprained. I think it should be better by tomorrow. Yes, since your brother isn't here, I'll take a look. I don't want him to accuse me of taking advantage of you when he comes back, Fengjiu said with a smile. Hearing this, Xie Shixi smiled and said, You won't take advantage of me. As she spoke, she took off her boots and untied the bandage on her leg. It had been wrapped for an entire day, so the skin where the medicine was wrapped was slightly wrinkled. Fengjiu touched her leg with his hand and heard Xie Shixi gasp slightly. TSK, it still hurts when you move. Hearing this, she put her hand on it and looked at Xie Shixi. She asked, Are you afraid of encountering these things on this trip? Yes, but with you by our side, I don't feel so afraid. Xie Shixi said honestly. She looked at Fengjiu and said, When I fell in here, I was very afraid, but when you and my brother came, I wasn't afraid anymore. But when I saw the wolf pack just now, I was also very scared. I've never seen so many wolf beasts before. Those people were so powerful, and they were all injured. I thought we were dead for sure. While talking to her, Fengjiu's hand on Xie Shixi's ankle turned slightly. In the darkness of the night, no one saw that her palm was releasing a faint green light, which was slowly seeping into Xie Shixi's ankle. Alright, this leg can't be wrapped with medicine all the time. Let it breathe. Fengjiu said, motioning for her to put on her boots. He took out some water to wash his hands. On the other side, the old man and the middle-aged man returned. Both of them were injured, especially the old man. His face was a little pale, and his gray robe was stained with blood. Guo Xining went up and helped the old man to sit down. Looking at the injured Guo family disciples, the old man coughed and asked, How are the casualties? Great Elder, don't worry. No one died. Only a few of them were seriously injured. The rest of them are more or less injured. Guo Xining said. Hearing this, the first elder, who had just sat down, stood up again. I'll go take a look. Great Elder, you are also injured, sit down and rest. The middle-aged man said, supporting him and not letting him get up. Only now did Guaxining notice that Great Elder's shoulder was bleeding, but his clothes were not torn. Startled, he asked, "Is Great Elder's injury serious?" "I was afraid that you would be worried, so I simply bandaged my wounds and changed my clothes before coming back." The middle-aged man looked at the pale First Elder and sighed. Hearing this, Guaxining's heart sank. If that was the case, then his injuries were probably very serious. "All right, I'm fine. I'll be fine after a short rest," the old man said and gestured, "Go check on the others. I don't need you here." Seeing this, although Guaxining was worried, he still replied, "Yes." Only then did he turn around to look at the others. Chapter 26:59. In the darkness of the night, no one knew that several ferocious beasts that had come for the smell of blood had been silently repelled by Fengzhou. With the Guo family as the center, an ancient pressure faintly spread out in the air, intimidating those ferocious beasts that had been eyeing them covetously, making them not dare to take even half a step closer. At this time, the old man and the middle-aged man of the Guo family were looking around worriedly. "The smell of blood here is too strong. I'm afraid it will attract the ferocious beasts again. Now our people are injured like this and can't bear a second attack. First Elder and Uncle Sun, don't worry. I have arranged for people with lighter injuries to guard around," Guaxining said, glancing at the people around him. Suddenly, he saw a cyan figure coming out of the dark and sitting back under the tree. "You have to be careful," the old man said in a weak voice. "If it weren't for the crisis at night and our people being exhausted, we really couldn't stay here any longer. I'll take 2 more people to patrol around," Guaxining said, saluting and turning away. Sha Yutang saw that Guaxining was about to take 2 people to patrol around, so he stepped forward and said, "Brother Gua, your injury hasn't been treated yet. If the wound is not treated, it will be inflamed." Hearing this, Guaxining looked at his injury and showed a gentle smile. "It doesn't matter. It's just a small injury. Small injuries also need to be treated," Sha Yutang said, turning around to ask the person around him for the medicine. Unexpectedly, the person said, "The medicine has been used up, and there are still several people who don't have medicine. There are too many people injured this time, and the medicine brought is not enough." Hearing this, Sha Yutang was stunned. He glanced at them and saw Guaxining smile. Then he took him to Fengzhou under the tree. "Fengzhou still has half a bottle of medicine. I'll ask him to bandage you." Guaxining was pulled to Fengzhou under the tree. Looking at the young man in cyan sitting with his eyes closed, Guaxining's eyes flashed slightly, but he didn't speak. "Xiao Zhou." Sha Yutang showed a flattering smile and called him Xiao Zhou instead of Fengzhou. Seeing Fengzhou open his eyes, he hurriedly said, "Well, they have used up all the medicine for wounds. I remember you still have half a bottle of medicine for wounds. Use that medicine to bandage Brother Gua's wound." Seeing this, Fengzhou took out the half-filled bottle of medicine and gestured, "Sit down." Guaxining sat down and took off his jacket, revealing the wound on his chest and the wound on his arm. He tilted his head slightly and looked at Fengzhou. He saw that his expression was indifferent. After cleaning the wound, he took out some medicine and simply bandaged the wound. "That's enough." Fengzhou stood up and said, "Are you going to patrol the night?" "I'll go." With that, she walked into the darkness alone. "Hey, Xiao Zhou." Sha Yutang wanted to stop him, but he had already gone to the dark. "Don't worry, I'll go with him," Guaxining said, turning back to tell the other 2 men, and then walked to the dark. Feng Nine walked around, holding a branch that she had picked up from somewhere. She fiddled with the weeds from time to time. Her pace was neither fast nor slow. Rather than saying that she was patrolling, it was better to say that she was taking a walk. Hearing the movement behind her, she looked back and saw Gua Xining. She asked, "Why are you here, child Gua?" Chapter 2660. Gua Xining came to Fengzhou's side and tilted his head slightly to look at this youth who was half a head shorter than him. "I am only a servant in the Xiefu. Naturally, I cannot break the rules. But from what I see, you don't look like a servant at all. In fact, you look more like a master than Yutang." He stared at him as though he wanted to see something from his face. Fengzhou laughed lightly. "That is because he is casual and does not have the airs of a master." "Is that so?" It was clear that he did not believe it. The two did not speak and slowly walked around, observing the movements in the surroundings. After a long time, Gua Xining broke the silence. "Why were you not injured when you faced the wolf pack?" He had wanted to ask this question when he saw that they did not have any wounds. He had held it in until now and finally asked. Hearing this, Fengzhou tilted his head slightly to look at him, his face filled with shock. "Young Master Guo wants us to be injured?" Gua Xining did not expect to hear him ask this. He looked deeply at Fengzhou and shook his head. "No, I just have some doubts." "What is there to be puzzled about?" "It is because you were protecting us that we were not injured." She said it matter-of-factly, as though it was the truth. If Gua Xining had not seen the scene at the time and knew that the Guo family would not have been able to protect them in that kind of situation, he would have really believed his words. Not being able to get anything out of him, he did not ask further and just silently patrolled the night. However, as the night deepened and the surroundings became quieter, he could not help but stop walking and look into the darkness of the forest. "What is it?" Fengzhou also stopped walking and asked. "It is very strange," Gua Xining said. Fengzhou's eyes moved slightly and asked, "What is strange?" "The blood of the wolf pack, the blood of the Guo clan's injured disciples, has permeated this place for a long time without dissipating. The smell of blood is so heavy, yet there are no ferocious beasts around. This doesn't make sense." Gua Xining pondered. He couldn't think of a reason why the night had become so peaceful. Anyone with a little bit of experience in the outside world would know that in a forest full of dangerous ferocious beasts, especially at night, the smell of blood would cause the ferocious beasts to become restless. However, other than the wolf pack that had fought with them earlier, the smell of blood did not attract any other ferocious beasts. This was somewhat illogical because he originally thought that tonight would definitely be a bitter battle, but he didn't expect it to be so peaceful. Fengzhou chuckled. "Do you always overthink things? Isn't it a good thing that there are no more ferocious beasts?" Her ancient pressure was emitted outwards, and Gua Xining's strength wasn't too strong, so he naturally couldn't sense the existence of her ancient pressure. "That's right, how long will it take to get out of here?" She even left some pills in the Yi Bao Lu. She said that she would get the items to exchange after 7 days. If they were trapped here, they would probably miss it. There is a transportation array set up by our clan here. As long as we reach it, we will be able to leave the forest of 1,000 poisons. Gua Xining said, his brows slightly furrowed. "However, everyone is injured now, and I can see that the Great Elder's injuries are not light. I'm afraid that we will encounter many ferocious beasts along the way. If we want to climb over that mountain to reach the transportation array, it will probably take some time." Chapter 2661. If there was no teleportation formation, they wouldn't have been teleported here from the Ruan clan's teleportation formation. However, where was the Ruan clan's teleportation formation? Could it be at the place where they were teleported out? Thinking of this, she shook her head inwardly. That shouldn't be possible. There shouldn't be any formation at that place. Or rather, when she heard Xieshirsi's exclamation, she didn't go there to check. Perhaps the Ruan clan's formation was hidden there. However, now that they had traveled so far, they naturally couldn't go back there to look for the formation, which they didn't know if it existed. She sighed in her heart. It seemed that she could only leave with the Guo clan. That night, although it was not very peaceful, the latter half of the night was very peaceful. Although those who were injured did not dare to sleep too deeply, in the end, they could not resist the tiredness that came over them and fell into a deep sleep. When they woke up, they found that the morning sun had already shone on the forest. The night had passed, and a new day welcomed them. It's daybreak. No ferocious beasts attacked us last night. That's great. Cheers rang out from everyone's mouths. Naturally, they didn't know that they were able to sleep peacefully without being attacked by fierce beasts because someone had blocked the danger for them. It was because someone had protected them that they were able to safely pass through the night. The middle-aged man stood up and coughed deeply. He looked at everyone and said, "Let's set off." Yes. Everyone responded with a big grin on their faces. When the Xie siblings saw Fengjiu walk back, they asked, "Xiaojiu, are you tired?" Fengjiu shook his head. "No. There's a fruit here. Eat it." Xieshirsi took out a fruit and handed it to him. Fengjiu smiled. "No need. I have some." She fished out 3 fruits from her sleeve and handed one to each of them. "Have a taste." As soon as she finished speaking, she took a bite of the fruit. The Xie siblings looked at the bright red fruit and couldn't help but be surprised. They took a bite, but once it entered their mouths, they felt different. This was a spirit fruit. The fruit was fresh, sweet, and juicy. With just one bite, they could feel their dry throats being moistened by the juice. A trace of spiritual energy spread through their bodies, making them feel full of energy. After eating the fruits, they continued on their journey with the Guo family. Along the way, they occasionally encountered ferocious beasts, but they didn't appear in groups, so the Guo family didn't have much trouble dealing with them. However, at noon, a cry of surprise came from the front of the group. "Great Elder! Great Elder!" Those who were walking at the back looked to the front and saw that the old man in front seemed to have fainted. Everyone surrounded him in panic and called out, "What's wrong with the Grand Elder? Why did you suddenly faint? Great Elder's face is so pale. He's breaking out in cold sweat." Hearing the crowd's words, Fengjiu and the others also walked forward. However, they were all surrounded by the Guo family members and could not squeeze their way forward. They could only vaguely see the old man fainted and Guo Xining taking off his outer robe. Maybe the injuries on his body have worsened. The middle-aged man said with worry in his eyes. Chapter 2662. The white cloth wrapped around the wound was oozing with blood. It had a yellowish-white color, and there was a faint stench coming from it. When Guo Xining took off the cloth covering the wound and saw the red, swollen, inflamed, and festering wound, he couldn't help gasping. Hiss! How can this wound be so serious? Everyone's expression changed when they saw the bone-deep wound on the old man's shoulder. It was a wound caused by the Wolf King. The deep claw marks were a ghastly sight, especially when the wound was worsening. It was even more frightening. I didn't expect the wound to become like this overnight. The middle-aged man looked dignified. Guo Xining looked at the middle-aged man and asked, "Uncle Sun, can't you do anything about it?" His medical skills were one of the best in the clan. In addition to his fighting ability, medical skills were also a major factor in this team. The situation is not very good. The middle-aged man said, the wound has become like this in just one night. Other than the fire poison in the body, the wound still needs to be disinfected. It's just that we didn't bring enough medicine this time. We don't have any more anti-inflammatory medicine or medicine to treat the wound. First Elder, I'm afraid you can't hold on until we get to the transmission formation. Guaxining said and fell silent for a while. Well, will it be better to remove the festering flesh? The sudden voice made everyone stunned. They turned around and looked at Sha Yutang with displeasure and contempt. It's easy for you to say. That's meat. How can you do it casually? Sha Yutang touched his nose embarrassedly and just said, my original wound was also a little inflamed and festered. Fengjiu cured it for me. I thought that before he finished speaking, he saw everyone looking at him again. He waved his hand quickly. Forget it. If you think this method is not good, just listen to it. Don't take it seriously. Fengjiu glanced at him speechlessly. Was this guy's brain kicked by the furnace again? Why did he always get into trouble? Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, Guaxining looked over. Fengjiu, do you know medicine? Fengjiu paused and looked at him. I know a thing or two. Hearing this, the people who originally had hope in their hearts couldn't help but be disappointed again. How could a brat like him know anything about medicine? Even Uncle Sun said that the situation is not good. What can he do? That's right. This brat has been hiding in the back all this time. Sometimes, he doesn't even make a sound. If he doesn't speak, I treat him as if he's invisible. How could he know anything about medicine? Hearing their words, Fengjiu smiled. His eyes narrowed slightly as his gaze swept across everyone's faces. Then, he said leisurely, although I only know a little, it's more than enough to treat this kind of injury. Hearing this, Guaxining's eyes lit up. Really? Of course. She stood there without moving and simply responded. TSK. This grandson is quite arrogant. That's right. Aren't you afraid of blowing your own trumpet? Fengjiu looked at them with a smile. How about this? I'll treat your grand elder. If he's really cured. She paused and looked at them with narrowed eyes. How about it? How much does it cost? The Guo family's disciples looked at her with contempt in their eyes. Fengjiu smiled. I don't want the fee. As long as you see me in the future, you can call me ancestor. Guaxining tried to calm them down so that they wouldn't act rashly. However, because they were all injured, and now that they saw that the great elder was seriously injured and unconscious, they became even more anxious. Their temper also rose, and they couldn't suppress it even if they wanted to. Xan Ning, you don't have to stop them. Let them go. Our Guo family team can't keep people like them. The middle-aged man said with his hands behind his back. It was obvious that he wanted the three of them to leave. Chapter 2664. Uncle Sun. Guaxining had a bad feeling in his heart. His intuition told him that he couldn't let Fengjiu and the other two leave their team, otherwise it would be worse. The middle-aged man turned around with his hands behind his back and no longer looked at them. Seeing this, the other children immediately shouted, "Get out of here! Get out of here! You, don't go too far!" Sha Yutang was a little annoyed by them again and again. How could these people be so unreasonable? They just followed them for a day. They picked up the branches themselves and ate the barbecue by themselves. Fengjiu also barbecued the meat for them. Moreover, He helped them bandage their wounds last night and gave them the medicine on his body, but now he turned his back on them. Xie had never been yelled at by anyone. At this time, hearing this, she couldn't help shrinking her shoulders and whispering, "When the wolf beasts came, it was Fengzhou who protected us. You didn't protect us." She was telling the truth, but it sounded like a provocation to the children of the Guo family. One of them sneered, "Oh. If it weren't for us, do you think you could still live until now? If it weren't for us fighting desperately against the wolf beasts, would you not be hurt at all?" Fengzhou smiled and didn't say anything more. He just turned to Xie and said, "Let's go." As soon as his voice fell, he turned around and walked back. Fengzhou. Guo Xining quickly stepped forward and stood in front of him. He looked at him with complicated eyes. "Do you really want to do this?" Hearing this, Fengzhou chuckled. "You really shouldn't ask me this question." She chuckled, turned her head slightly to look at the children of the Guo family, and said, "Tell me, which of these people in your family has looked at us seriously? Since you don't take us seriously, why should we follow you?" Her voice paused for a moment, her tone filled with leisure and laziness. Her expression no longer had the simple and honest look they usually saw, only indifference and confidence remained. "If we leave you, we'll just have to take a few more detours. Your Guo family has a transmission array here, so we naturally have one too." When Guo Xining heard this, his gaze was slightly startled. He watched him walk past him and was actually unable to say a word. He also did not know how to persuade him to stay. "Brother Guo, take care." Sha Yutang passed by him and said with a fish salute, "Brother Guo, goodbye." Xie said as she quickly caught up with Fengzhou. Suddenly, she was stunned. She looked down at her feet and skipped forward. "Brother, Xiaojiu, look. My feet are healed. My feet are healed." Was he really cured? When did it get better? Sha Yutang said in surprise. He followed Fengzhou to leave while looking at his sister's feet. "I don't know either. I just found out that my feet were cured." If I had known earlier, my brother wouldn't have had to carry me all the time. Fengzhou in front of them smiled and said, "It's okay to let your brother carry you. Anyway, his physical strength is poor, and he should practice more." "Aw. Xiaojiu, do you mean that I'm heavy?" I'm not heavy, Xie said with a pout. She held her brother's hand and followed Fengzhou. Watching the three of them gradually go away, Guo Xining's mood became inexplicably heavy for some reason. "Well, get ready, we." Chapter 2665. Ferocious Beasts. Be on guard. The middle-aged man shouted, instructing everyone to be on guard and prepare for battle. However, hearing the roars of the ferocious beasts coming from all around, his heart sank. Why were there so many ferocious beasts? Judging from the sounds, there were at least a few dozen ferocious beasts. It's the ferocious beasts. Quick! Be on guard! The Guo family disciples panicked. They were all injured, and hearing the roars coming from all around, they knew that it was another group of beasts. In that moment, the scene of last night's battle appeared in their minds again. Dealing with a few of them was no problem, but if another group of ferocious beasts came, they would really become food for the ferocious beasts this time. Guo Xining listened to the roars of the ferocious beasts coming from all around, and his heart suddenly jolted, as if something had exploded in his mind. The things that he couldn't understand, the things that he felt uneasy about, became clear at this moment. He abruptly turned around to look in the direction that Fengzhou and the others had left, only to see that the three of them had long since disappeared. Instead, what appeared around them were ferocious beasts that were baring their sharp fangs as they charged towards them. He stood there in a daze, his eyes filled with disbelief and shock, so much so that he couldn't react to the scene in front of him. Seeing that the ferocious beasts were about to pounce on him, but Guoxining stood there in a daze, as if he had lost his soul, the middle-aged man immediately went forward. Xining, what are you doing? Get ready for battle. The middle-aged man's shout woke Guoxining up from his daze. He looked at him and smiled bitterly. Uncle Sun, I finally know. Yes, he finally knew why Fingzhou and the other two were not injured at all when the wolves attacked last night. He finally knew why the smell of blood after last night's battle did not attract another attack from the ferocious beasts. It was because of him, because he was in their group. Thinking of his half-smile before he left, and what he said, we don't know who's protecting who, he felt his face burning. It was really him who was protecting them, but they didn't know it, and even scolded them with disdainful words, and even chased them away. Thinking of this, he felt bitter in his heart. This was the result of the Guo family's own actions, so who could they blame? Looking at his bitter expression, the middle-aged man was startled and asked, "No what?" Uncle Sun, why do you think the smell of blood last night didn't attract another attack from the beasts? Uncle Sun felt that when the Guo family's disciples couldn't handle the situation, would they still think about protecting Fingzhou and the Xie siblings? Why did the ferocious beasts appear as soon as the three of them left? Even though the middle-aged man didn't have the same surname, he was still quite a figure in the Guo clan. Now that the middle-aged man mentioned it, he naturally understood what the middle-aged man meant. He looked at Guoxining in shock and astonishment. You're saying that this is all because of the three of them? It's not because of the three of them, but because of Fingzhou. Guoxining sighed. Unfortunately, our Guo clan's disciples have thoroughly offended him. When the middle-aged man heard this, his body swayed and he couldn't stand steadily. His face turned pale as he looked at the ferocious beasts surrounding him and the Guo family disciples retreating step by step. His lips moved, but he still couldn't believe that the young man had such ability. Chapter 2666. Roar. A beast's roar was heard, causing the air to tremble slightly. Immediately after, a lion with flames under its feet rushed over. It roared and pounced on the Guo family disciple. Hiss! Divine beast! The Guo family disciples turned pale with fright. With their strength, they were no match for a divine beast even if they were not injured, let alone now that they were injured. Awoo! Suddenly, a wolf's howl was heard. After seeing the flaming lion and hearing the wolf's howl, everyone's mind went blank and they had the urge to run away. It's the Wolf King. It's the wolf head. Hiss! The Wolf King is here for revenge. What should we do? What should we do? For a moment, everyone panicked. Due to the extreme fear and shock in their hearts, their reaction slowed down. In just a few breaths of time, one of the Guo family's disciples was bitten to death by the lion beast, and a few more were injured by the lion beast's claws. Cries of alarm and screams could be heard from time to time, and the scene was extremely chaotic. Calm down. Calm down. Don't panic. Don't panic. Hiss. The middle-aged man tried to calm everyone down and fight, but he was distracted by the crowd and was bitten by a fierce beast on his calf. Blood immediately flowed out. Ah! He screamed and tried to shake off the ferocious beast that was biting his leg. However, the ferocious beast seemed to want to bite off the flesh on his calf and refused to let go. Whoosh! A cold light flashed and a sharp sword aura instantly chopped off the beast's head. Blood splattered and the middle-aged man fell to the ground. Uncle Sun. Guaxining held his sword in one hand and quickly helped him up. He blocked the fierce beast that pounced on him and retreated to the side of the unconscious old man. The disciples who were protecting the old man were now covered in blood. It was unknown whether the blood on their faces was theirs or the fierce beast's. They were in a killing frenzy and desperately defended the old man. In order to block the fatal blow that was pouncing towards the old man, Guaxining was sent flying by the snow-white wolf king that had appeared out of nowhere. The powerful impact caused Guaxining to lose his balance and fall outwards. The blood in his body surged and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ning. The middle-aged man abruptly stood up with the help of a tree, but when he saw the ferocious wolf king approaching step by step, he couldn't help but shiver. On the other side, hearing the sound of the fierce beast behind them, Xie Yutang and Xie Yutang looked at each other. After hesitating for a while, Xie Yutang asked cautiously, "Xiao Zhou, what's the matter with the fierce beast behind us?" Feng Zhou smiled. What else could it be? The Wolf King must have gone back to seek revenge, and there should be other ferocious beasts along the way. After all, those ferocious beasts have been following them all the way. Ah. Have you been following me all the way? Why didn't we know about it? The Xie siblings asked in unison. Even the Guo family didn't know. How could you know? She chuckled and took out a fruit to eat. Then, can the Guo family survive? Xie Yutang asked hesitantly. Hearing this, Xie Shirsi couldn't help worrying. She looked at Feng Zhou, who was eating the fruit leisurely, and asked, "Can Brother Guo survive?" You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.